A board of directors is a body of elected or appointed members who jointly oversee the activities of a company or organization, which can include a non-profit organization or a government agency or corporation. A board of directors' activities are determined by the powers, duties, and responsibilities delegated to it or conferred on it by an authority outside itself. These matters are typically detailed in the organization's constitution and bylaws. These documents commonly also specify the number of members of the board, how they are to be chosen, and how often they are to meet. However, the constitution and bylaws rarely address a board's powers when faced with a corporate turnaround, restructuring, or emergencies, where board members need to act as agents of change in addition to the traditional fiduciary responsibilities. In an organization with voting members, the board acts on behalf of and is subordinate to the organization's full group, which usually chooses the members of the board. In a stock corporation, the board is elected by the shareholders and is the highest authority in the management of the corporation. The board of directors appoints the chief executive officer of the corporation and sets out the overall strategic direction. In a non-stock corporation with no general voting membership, the board is the supreme governing body of the institution. Its members are sometimes chosen by the board itself. Terminology. Other names include Board of Governors, Board of Managers, Board of Regents, Board of Trustees, Board of Visitors, a Board of Directors and Advisors. It may also be called the Executive Board, and is often simply referred to as the board. Roles. Typical duties of boards of directors include governing the organization by establishing broad policies and setting out strategic objectives, selecting, appointing, supporting and reviewing the performance of the chief executive, of which the titles vary from organization to organization. The chief executive may be titled Chief Executive Officer, President or Executive Director, terminating the Chief Executive, ensuring the availability of adequate financial resources, approving annual budgets, accounting to the stakeholders for the organization's performance, setting the salaries, compensation and benefits of senior management. The legal responsibilities of boards and board members vary with the nature of the organization and with the jurisdiction within which it operates. For companies with publicly trading stock, these responsibilities are typically much more rigorous and complex than for those of other types. Typically, the board chooses one of its members to be the chairman, who holds whatever title is specified in the bylaws or articles of association. However, in membership organizations, the members elect the president of the organization and the president becomes the chairman of the board, unless the bylaws say otherwise. Directors. The directors of an organization are the persons who are members of its board. Several specific terms categorize directors by the presence or absence of their other relationships to the organization. Inside director. An inside director is a director who is also an employee, officer, chief executive, major shareholder, or someone similarly connected to the organization. Inside directors represent the interests of the entity's stakeholders, and often have special knowledge of its inner workings, its financial or market position, and so on. Typical inside directors are a chief executive officer who may also be chairman of the board, other executives of the organization, such as its chief financial officer or executive vice president. Large shareholders, representatives of other stakeholders such as labor unions, major lenders, or members of the community in which the organization is located. An inside director who is employed as a manager or executive of the organization is sometimes referred to as an executive director. Executive directors often have a specified area of responsibility in the organization, such as finance, marketing, human human resources, or production. Outside director. An outside director is a member of the board who is not otherwise employed by or engaged with the organization, and does not represent any of its stakeholders. A typical example is a director who is president of a firm in a different industry. Outside directors are not employees of the company or affiliated with it in any other way. Outside directors bring outside experience and perspectives to the board. For example, a company that only serves a domestic market, the presence of CEOs from global multinational corporations as outside directors can help to provide insights on export and import opportunities, and international trade options. One of the arguments for having outside directors is that they can keep a watchful eye on the inside directors and on the way the organization is run. Outside directors are unlikely to tolerate insider dealing between insider directors, as outside directors do not benefit from the company or organization. Outside directors are often useful in handling disputes between inside directors, or between shareholders and the board. They are thought to be advantageous because they can be objective and present little risk of conflict of interest. On the other hand, they might lack familiarity with the specific issues connected to the organization's governance, and they might not know about the industry or sector in which the organization is operating. Terminology. Director: a person appointed to serve on the board of an organization, such as an institution or business. Inside director: a director who, in addition to serving on the board, has a meaningful connection to the organization. Outside director: a director who, other than serving on the board, has no meaningful connections to the organization. Executive director: an inside director who is also an executive with the organization. The term is also used, in a completely different sense, to refer to a CEO. Non-executive director: a director who is not an executive with the organization. Shadow: a de facto director, an individual who is not a named director but who nevertheless directs or controls the organization. Nominee director: an individual who is appointed by a shareholder, creditor or interest group and who has a continuing loyalty to the appointer per second or other interest in the appointing company. Individual directors often serve on more than one board. This practice results in an interlocking directorate, where a relatively small number of individuals have significant influence over a large number of important entities. This situation can have important corporate, social, economic, and legal consequences, and has been the subject of significant research. Process and structure. The process for running a board, sometimes called the board process, includes the selection of board members, the setting of clear board objectives, the dissemination of documents, a board package to the board members, the collaborative creation of an agenda for the meeting, the creation and follow-up of assigned action items, and the assessment of the board process through standardized assessments of board members, owners, and CEOs. The science of this process has been slow to develop due to the secretive nature of the way most companies run the boards. However, some standardization is beginning to develop. Some who are pushing for this standardization in the USA are the National Association of Corporate Directors, McKinsey Consulting, and the Board Group. Board meetings. A board of directors conducts its meetings according to the rules and procedures contained in its governing documents. These procedures may allow the board to conduct its business by conference call or other electronic means. They may also specify how a quorum is to be determined. Most organizations have adopted Robert's Rules of Order as its guide to supplement its own rules. In this book, The Rules for Conducting conducting board meetings may be less formal if there is no more than about a dozen board members present. An example of the informality is that motions are not required if it's clear what is being discussed. Size. Historically, non-profit boards have not uncommonly had large boards with up to 24 members, but a modern trend is to have smaller boards as small as 6 or 7 people. Studies suggest that after 7 people, each additional person reduces the effectiveness of group decision-making. Non-corporate boards. The role and responsibilities of a board of directors vary depending on the nature and type of business entity and the laws applying to the entity. For example, the nature of the business entity may be one that is traded on a public market, not traded on a public market, owned by family members, or exempt from income taxes. There are numerous types of business entities available throughout the world, such as a corporation, limited liability company, cooperative, business trust, partnership, private limited company, and public limited company. Much of what has been written about boards of directors relates to boards of directors of business entities actively traded on public markets. More recently, however, material is becoming available for boards of private and closely held businesses, including family businesses. A board-only organization is one whose board is self-appointed, rather than being accountable to a base of members through elections, or in which the powers of the membership are extremely limited. Membership organizations. In membership organizations, such as a society made up of members of a certain profession or one advocating a certain cause, a board of directors may have the responsibility of running the organization in between meetings of the membership, especially if the membership meets infrequently, such as only at an annual general meeting. The amount of powers and authority delegated to the board depend on the bylaws and rules of the particular organization. Some organizations place matters exclusively in the board's control, while in others, the general membership retains full power and the board can only make recommendations. The setup of a board of directors vary widely across organizations and may include provisions that are applicable to corporations, in which the shareholders are the members of the organization. A difference may be that the membership elects the officers of the organization, such as the president and the secretary, and the officers become members of the board in addition to the directors and retain those duties on the board. The directors may also be classified as officers in this situation. There may also be ex officio members of the board, or persons who are members due to another position that they hold. These ex officio members have all the same rights as the other board members. Members of the board may be removed before the term is complete. Details on how they can be removed are usually provided in the bylaws. If the bylaws do not contain such details, the section on disciplinary procedures in Robert's Rules of Order may be used.